Are you ready for an open discussion with the best of the best and the best of what's next? Welcome to the Tony DUrso Show. Join in on a great conversation today with some of the world's great influencers as they showcase great advice and techniques that made them the game changers they are today. Now, here's Tony DUrso.
Welcome. Thanks for joining in with us. Now, you're a leader in this post-pandemic world, and you know one thing for certain. One thing. You know a lot of your role has changed, and employee expectations in being in a workplace has really shifted a lot, greatly shifted. And you know that, and you're getting more and more used to it, to having employees all around the globe. Perhaps that makes more work for you, and perhaps that gets less work actually done. I feel it myself. I feel that maybe I get less work done from having people do things around the world, but there's a convenience to it. But I want to ask you this one question. When does it all end? When does it all get sorted out? So I tell you what, let's work on that now. We're going to talk about the new Leadership Playbook with Andrew Bryant. And while you're at it, this is all about helping you and your friends turn your vision into reality. We want to help you get really successful, very successful, super successful at growing your business to a high, sustainable level. Well, meet Andrew Bryant. He's the world's leading expert on self-leadership. So if you're not familiar with him yet, zone in on this and let's get to know him. I think that says it all. Let's get into it. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the Tony DUrso Show.
Hi, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
Andrew, we're all looking forward to getting our wits, our brain, and everything around the new Leadership Playbook. So let's kind of go back a little bit and tell me, how did it all start?
Okay, so the new Leadership Playbook actually was commissioned by one of my clients. So I work as an executive coach, as a C-suite advisor, and I was working with CEO and his executive leadership team, as is the thing that I normally do. And the chief people officer said, well, we love what you've done for us as the executive leadership team, but we need a playbook for our managers so everybody is saying the same thing and using some of the methodology that you've taught us. Could you write a book? And I've written books before, and I said, we discussed this, we negotiated it, and I said, yeah, I can write a book for your company, but I want to hang on to the IP and write a book for everybody. If I'm going to write a book, I want to write it so that everybody has access. So typically, a leadership book comes at it from 40,000 feet. I know this because I'm external faculty on a few MBA programs. But the intention of this book is to create a playbook, just like in American football, where a play is a series of set moves. This is a book that has 12 plays, which are really conversations that managers, leaders, entrepreneurs need to have with their people to deliver results.
Andrew,
so that's how the book came about.
Let me kind of ask something about that. Okay, so you were asked to write this book. So when my audience is thinking, you know, you're an expert on self-leadership. What's your backstory? What made you to be this expert that then brought about this book?
Well, then we have to go back a very, very long time. I mean, I had a birthday this week and I turned 61. So we have to go all the way back to when I was 21. And I graduated as a physiotherapist in the UK, in England. I was going to do medicine. I was a good science student, but then they merged my boys' grammar school with the girls' high school just before my A-levels, before university. And I don't know what happened, but my grades took a bit of a dip, and I did physiotherapy. Now, physiotherapy in the US, you would know that as physical therapy. In the UK, it has a little bit more of a broader scope. I graduated, worked in hospitals for a couple of years, and then did what most male physiotherapists do, is I worked in sport. I worked with first division soccer team. I worked with Olympic athletes. I worked with a ballet company. And working in sport, you get interested in the psychology, right? Yeah, I mean, I graduated in the 80s when the research around goal setting happened. And so we were looking at what is the difference that makes the difference? What's the difference between, you know, people can train the same, but why does one team win? And so I got interested in this, and I got interested in the concept of coaching, and I moved to Australia. and I set up a chain of physiotherapy. By this time, I was a graduate in acupuncture. I had a chain of clinics. I opened up a holistic wellness center, and I started working with companies who were sponsoring those sports. And one of the managing directors said, "Hey, you helped my sports team win. Come and work with my management team because they kind of suck." And that's how the transition happened. I went in with a blank sheet of paper, and I watched behaviors. And I watched how these managers talk to each other and how they talk to their teams. And so I was looking at behavior in context. And that's very important when we think about leadership. A lot of people, I've written books on leadership. People ask, what's the best type of leadership? Well, it depends on context and the kind of people that you're leading. So that was the beginning of my framework. I had a bit of imposter syndrome because I didn't have an MBA, so I went off to get one and realized that I didn't agree with some of the things that were being taught on the MBA program. And I had a great lecturer who said, "You've got some good ideas. You don't agree with me, so go write your own book." And here we are 4 books later.
It's a really interesting story. And I have to say, and I have to admit, prior to this interview, I never really heard the term self-leadership. And if I ever did, it went over my head. So I'm thinking, you're the expert on self-leadership. So out of all this training, I get that, but somewhere along the line, this concept came, self-leadership, and you realized perhaps that you were very good at it and that you could teach it. So tell us about that vision and how that came about, that it was like that aha, like, hey, it's self-leadership that's important.
Again, we have to go back a little while. It was the late 1990s, and I had started this methodology, and I didn't have a name for it. And I'd been to a professional speakers meeting, and I was having a coffee afterwards with an organizational psychologist. And he was curious about what I was doing because it overlapped with his work. And he said, "Well, what's your pedagogy or your andragogy? What's your methodology?" And I said, "Well, it's about people taking ownership for themselves and being, taking responsibility, being self-directed." And he actually used the term. He said, "Oh, you mean like self-leadership?" And I said, "Yeah, that's it." And I thought we had invented the term at that point. And I created a company, Self Leadership International. I own the URL, selfleadership.com. That was probably 1998, 1999. But there was a guy that used the term and the definition in 1985, 87. So I don't own it. But I did in 2012 with Dr. Anna Kazan write the textbook in which the definition, which if you Google the definition, you'll probably find, which is the practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions towards your objectives. And let me deconstruct that for you and for your listeners. It's a practice. Now, if anybody's old enough to remember Zig Ziglar, the motivational sales trainer in the US, and Zig used to say, motivation is like taking a shower. The effect is not permanent. And so self-leadership is like taking a shower. It is a practice. I've been writing, coaching, speaking about self-leadership for over 20 years. And every now and again, my wife will tell me if I'm having a meltdown, go self-leadership yourself. So it is a practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions. And so it's a daily practice, but it is about intention and influence. We have to own our thinking and feeling rather than our thinking and feeling owning us. And this is the ownership, the responsibility. And the absence of self-leadership is very easy to spot. It's blaming, complaining, and playing the victim. So if you're doing any of those three, you're not in self-leadership at that point. And if you're leading people, managing people who are blaming, complaining, and playing the victim, they are not taking ownership.
They need to go take that shower, that self-leadership shower.
Well, it's a physical and metaphorical shower. I mean, sometimes just taking a shower is a good idea. Taking a breath, taking a break, taking a step back from the things that trigger us so that we can get back to being intentional again. And it's it really is a state interrupt, a break, a deep breath, a cold shower, a glass of water, whatever you need to do. Because psychologists are showing we have very little free will, certainly a lot less than we thought we did, because from the moment of our birth, our mother carries us for 9 months and then, delivers us, and the midwife or the doctor holds us up, smacks us on the bottom. We may let out a bit of a cry, and then within a few moments, we're given a name, a nationality, an ethnicity, and possibly a religion and a football team to follow. We've been framed. And then we have our early child. Yeah, well, it depends where in the world I'm speaking. If I'm speaking in India, I say cricket team. So, even that's culturally specific, right? So you're born into a framework, and it takes a level of energy to step back from that and get intentional and say, well, what do I choose for myself? What's been programmed for me? And, as we go through life, there are various times, I don't know that you've had this experience, Tony, you're acting out and I'm being my dad or I'm being my mum. And you've been carrying that program all these years. This is why therapists are very busy, because people, oh my goodness, I've got to get that out of my head. Well, self-leadership is saying, hang on a moment, what do I want? What's important to me? Where am I going? What are my objectives? And then taking ownership for that, setting out on the behaviors that will move you towards the best version of yourself.
I really like that, because I can see right away that it's all about getting the person to accept responsibility for what the person is doing. Instead of standing there, I'm just going to be really simple graphic. Somebody knocked over the trash, it's metaphorical. Instead of complaining and screaming, just bend down and pick it up. It takes less effort, and it's more fun to do that than to jump up and down. And yet we see that in society, in the workplace, too much. So now I get that you're doing this, and I really want to go into self-leadership, some of the methodology, some of the tips and techniques. But the one question I have before I kind of jump into that platform is, why? Why are you doing this, Andrew? What's your purpose behind all this?
If I have a purpose, it's to wake people up. I mean, the thing that I took a stand-up comedy class decades ago, and the instructor said, the humor is in the things that irritate you, right? The things that annoy you. And I did a whole comedy skit about, how I used to get frustrated when you had to put your stuff in the tray to go through security at the airport, and then somebody would climb over the top of you to get to their stuff. And I'm like, we're at the gate, the plane's not going to take off anymore. Why? And so the thing that used to trigger me is paradoxically other people being triggered. The joke is I can't tolerate intolerant people, right? And so, teach best what you find hardest to learn. Why did I get into self-leadership? Because I had to take ownership of my life and say, well, what's important? I've been through a few challenges. I went through a business disruption, and I've been through the global financial crisis. I've been through health crisis. I've been through the divorce thing, come out the other side. All of those various life challenges that the temptation to have a pity party, suck my thumb, etc., and blame everybody else was there, but I got out of it, pulled myself up by the bootstraps, and was better on the other side. So when I see people stuck, I want to shake them and say, wake up, take ownership. There is a better life for you when you do that, when you accept, as you said, when you adjust your behaviors, then you can advance. And so why do I do it? Because, I'm like the guy that gave up smoking and wants everybody else to give up smoking, or even worse, the vegans who want to convert everybody else. I'm like that person. I'm like, there's an opportunity here for you not only to lead yourself, but when we can lead ourselves, then we can influence others to lead themselves. And that's what, for me, leadership is all about, is empowering and engaging others to be the best version of themselves, and hence the new Leadership Playbook.
And we're talking about the new Leadership Playbook with Andrew Bryant, and you can find him at selfleadership.com, selfleadership.com, and check it out. This is really interesting, and I want to kind of get into your vision path on here and get my brain around this. So let me kind of think with this. One of the things that I think can come at odds on the self-leadership that we've defined already is I've got to make a target. I'm in a rush. I've got to make a deadline. I am so used to many years in the corporate world being yelled at, we got to get this done. It's got to get done. It's like, boom, it's kind of similar. And it's like, well, you could say that may or may not be good leadership. We're not going to go there. But I'm saying, how do you practice that when you're in a rush? You've got something. You can't sit around and deal with the babies or whatever. I'm going to just leave it right there and give it over to you and help us through this.
Okay, well, there's a number of ways of approaching that. The first is to articulate the tagline of this book, which is being human whilst successfully delivering accelerated results. So, as you point out, it's a reality in business that we have deadlines. We have targets. And you could be the most empathetic and engaging and loved leader, but if you don't deliver on your targets, your tenure is temporary. You're not going to last. We have to deliver on targets. The question is, can we be human to do it? And the reality is that we only achieve those targets if we are empowering, engaging, and leveraging the humanity. And why do we need a new leadership playbook? Because many of the leadership principles have been around since the dawn of time, but because we've had 2 years of people taking greater ownership and responsibility as they work from home, as they had to manage themselves much more than having somebody lean over the desk. So we are actually now leading people who have greater autonomy and greater responsibility. And I think it's dangerous to try and turn the clock back. Yes, we want people to come back to the workplace, but we have to think about more intelligent ways about how do we get the best out of people. 9 to 5, leaning over and yelling at people has not delivered the best results. When you've got empowered, engaged people who are passionate about an objective where the company's objectives are aligned to the individual's advancement, those organizations are leaving the others in the dust. So whilst it feels like a real adrenaline rush to yell at people and get things done, be the sergeant major, it's only good for things that are repetitive or fairly simple. If you want people to bring their best, you got to do it a different way. And that's what we should be discussing.
Okay. And one thing I'm thinking with all of this is, as I mentioned in the intro, is we have this new paradigm shift over the past couple of years. You've talked about it. I've talked about it. I don't even know if most employees are home. Let's just say a lot more employees work from home, and things are different. And I think that throws in huge challenges to this self-leadership. So how do we solve that? How do we deal with that as the leader?
I don't know whether I think self-leadership is the answer to this, is being a self-leader and encouraging that in others. It's very difficult to encourage an environment of self-leaders if you're not practicing it yourself, right? It's, not do as I say, not as I do, right? The clear research from Google around, what makes a best functioning team is psychological safety, that people have the permission and it's safe to speak up and ask a question and challenge. So as a self-leader, you are taking ownership. Now, let me just take a sideways step for a moment and talk about something. Freud gave us this concept of ego, superego, and id. And in popular culture, people talk about leaders as having an ego, right? And so you see the person, it's all about me and it's all about my targets. Understanding that changes the way we look at ego. When people are being what people say is ego, it's they're being egotistical, being egomaniacal. That usually comes from having a weak ego. They are needy. Right? When you practice self-leadership, you know how to get your thoughts and feelings and actions taken care of, and so you're better able to focus on others. So you've actually got a healthy ego, so it reduces those egotistical, the yelling, the shouting type of behaviors. You can be a lot calmer because you're taking responsibility. if I give instructions to one of my team and they don't do what I expected them to do, first place I look is in the mirror. Did I set the expectations right? Because if they didn't come back, rather than immediately blame them, and I have a formula in the book that says, clear expectations times mindset and motivation times right behaviors equals results. So if I don't get a result, all right, I can take the feedback. My bad. I probably didn't explain this properly. Let me give you the feedback. This is what I was looking for. Do I have your buy-in for that? Oh. So instead of yelling and screaming and demoralizing an individual, we both take ownership and the job gets done. So addressing self first makes us a better leader. And the analogy, and it's been used by others before me, but it's a great metaphor. When you're on the airplane, the steward and stewardess says, if the oxygen mask falls from the ceiling, place over your nose and mouth before assisting others. Because you're useless. If you're stressed and you're freaking out, you're not empowering, engaging, inspiring your people. So take a breath of oxygen, and then you can help others.
You're no good if you've passed out. Of course, it's so obvious. Andrew, in your book, you've got some principles of the Leadership Playbook. Let's go into some of the plays and the principles. This is really interesting stuff.
Sure. Well, we've covered the first principle, which is self-leadership comes first. You can't lead others unless you first lead yourself. The second principle is leaders are learners. And we've sort of touched on this a little bit, which is this willingness to take the feedback as the leader, not to imagine that you're perfect, but to constantly take the feedback. I didn't give the instructions as effectively. I didn't get the results. So I look in the mirror and I learn, how can I do that better? And that's the second principle. And that gives us the third principle, which a number of organizations, Amazon for one, uses this, which is progress over perfection. One of the things that really is a problem for organizations in this hugely adaptable world is perfection. I just got back last month. I was in Sweden speaking for a large multi-country engineering company, and they're engineers and they love perfection. They love it. And their CEO is saying, we need to disrupt, we need to go into new markets, we need to try new things. And they go, but we don't want to do that until we're perfect. And the CEO is saying, you're going to have to go beyond that because it's going to be a learning curve. So leaders are learners. We need to make progress. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. And this is a huge mindset shift for engineers. But to their credit, they were embracing it because they had learned to adapt through the pandemic. Then you have another leadership principle that we've talked about, and it comes out of that self-leadership, that willingness to have a voice and encouraging your people to disagree with you. So you're not surrounded by yes people. And as an individual, you need to be able to disagree with your boss in a way that's not conflict. But once that the consensus has been reached or the direction has been agreed upon, you commit to that. So let me stop there. There's a couple more, but let me take a breath and invite you to jump in on any of those.
One thing that you mentioned, which may have nothing to do with these principles, and it may have something to do with the later principle, is I've been in corporate America for too many decades that I want to mention. And I routinely would run into, because we talked about, you've got your target, you've got what you want to do. Employee that just doesn't really want to do it, doesn't get with it, could work to get the task done, but just doesn't want to, kind of negative, but they're also kind of, let me be politically correct, slightly protected. You got to watch your P's and Q's a little bit, and you got to motivate this employee to just do the job that anybody else would be glad to do. And here I am talking about why you should do your job instead of we've got to make the target. You kind of get my drift on where we're going. And it's sort of like, what do you do when you get this obstinate type person that just doesn't kind of want to really go with the flow, but yet you've still got to be very diplomatic about it?
Well, Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, said, get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus. And In the book, I talk, one of the plays that I describe is around talent and strengths. And we have to understand the distinction between talent and strengths. Some people just have a talent. Now, my name is Andrew Bryant. I share the same surname as a very successful basketball player who is no longer with us. I do not have the innate talent to play basketball. I just don't have it, right? Now, I might have the commitment and the strength, right? Think about the movie Rudy, the guy that was too small to play American rules football, but he had the heart for it, right? So you're better off with somebody who's got the talent, who weighs 240 pounds and has the fast twitch muscle fibers. So we need to look at our team, and there's a great acronym in the book that is COW, C-O-W, capacity, ownership, and willingness, right? The capacity in the American Football League, if they're 240 pounds and they've got fast twitch muscle fibers, they've got natural talent for doing that. Are they taking ownership, and are they willing, right? And the O can also stand for opportunity. Have you put them in the right position, right? They got the capacity, but you haven't given them the right opportunity. You haven't put them in the right slot. You haven't played them in the right position. And are they willing? Now, if they don't have the capacity, there is no position for them and they're not willing, you got to get them off the bus ASAP. If they have some capacity and you think they're in the wrong position, move them around and see if they're willing to do something different. So you've got this diagnosis, and you should look at yourself. None of us are good at everything, right? I have some capacity in certain areas, right? And I make sure I choose the opportunities that work best for me, and I'm willing. There are areas I'm not good, and I get other people in to play that. Now, over and above that, you mention a layer of politics and protectionism, etc. And that is not an easy question to answer on a podcast. The reality is to look at, who is protecting that individual, why, what is the needs here, what is the currency, why is this person being protected? And it's tough for leaders to play politics. We would love to just have the best employees in the right opportunity and engage them to be motivated. As much as possible, getting somebody to want to do it for themselves is the key. And if you can't, again, get them off the bus. There's a wonderful formula for motivation, which comes out of the 1960s by a Dr. Vroom, Victor Vroom. And I love that name. I think it sounds like a Marvel anti-hero. But Vroom, and I actually address this in the book, but in a very simplified form, is Vroom says if people are going to be motivated, they have to have the expectation that if they put in the effort, they're going to have some level of improvement. And the simplest way to describe this is the gym. Right? If I go to the gym and I lift weights, I have to have the expectation that I'm going to get stronger or get fitter. Then when there is a movement, a delta, there is a change, that they're going to get acknowledged, or they're going to get some level of positive feedback from that. And the third component is that they care about that positive feedback. So we motivate people when we can show them that if they put in the effort, they're going to make some progress. When that progress happens, they're going to get some acknowledgement, and that they care about getting that acknowledgement. If you can address those things, you can turn around a non-performing employee. If you can't, get them off the bus as quickly as possible and fill the position with somebody who can do the job.
You said it exactly right. I totally agree with that, and that is the way to do it. Very interesting. I know we've got a few more principles to go over, so let's take the next one.
Yeah, I had to reach for the book for a moment. So it's all right. So the next principle is executive presence. And to be a leader, you need executive presence, which I like to define as the ability to project confidence, gravitas, and poise under pressure. In addition, the ability to read the audience, which perhaps speaks a little bit to the politics that we were talking about in the previous question. So I see a lot of leaders fail because they don't step into their executive presence. And act like an executive. They get promoted, but they're still operating like a frontline supervisor. As an executive with executive presence, you're going to start to have executive function, start stepping back, having ideas, insights, perspectives, and being able to articulate those with some gravitas, gravity, or substantiveness is another way of saying that. So developing your executive presence is essential for the leader. You could be technically brilliant, but if you cannot present your idea with executive presence, it will not be adopted. And you've spent time in corporate America, you know that the best ideas are not adopted, the best supported ideas are adopted. Oh, you like that?
I'm pondering that very thoroughly. And it makes me think of several things on, of course, training, explaining your vision and the purpose of the company to the employees and all this sort of thing. But sometimes you get these employees, and I may be going off on a tangent, but I have a myriad of experience in the corporate world I've never spoken about, where you get these little groups and they think you're just on a power trip. We've got a target to make. I've got a client. I've got a deadline, and I'm being as nice as I can be, but we've still got to get this thing done. And the employees lower think, oh, you're just on a power trip. You're just a big boss. They don't see the big picture. They just think you're pushing your weight around. And I've seen this sometimes, and it's really weird, and it's difficult to take care of. It may be similar to what I've said. They're either on the bus or you've got to get them off the bus. That's for sure. And it's just, I think there's a bit of, maybe part of that is increasing the executive presence to solicit that cooperation.
Well, if you think about,
'cause that's really what you're working with, is the cooperation of the people under you.
Sure. And that's the ability to read the audience as part of executive presence. You know what drives and inspires people. But executive presence isn't loud. In fact, if anything, it's quiet. I mean, I remember my father, may he rest in peace. When he went quiet, that's when we paid attention. Right? And so there's a certain, the gravitas is a power. It gives us the word gravity. A large mass like a planet has gravity. Right. So when you know your stuff and you have a history of delivering, a history of being thoughtful, of being right, then you become listened to. Aristotle, 2,500 years ago, said if you want to influence, have ethos, pathos, and logos. And ethos can be translated as ethics or character. It is that core of executive presence. Pathos is the empathy. We've talked about being human, and logos is the logic. But the logic is the least of the influential triad. The number one is the ethos. We listen to people. Some people walk into a room and everybody's eyes turn to them and they want to know what that person thinks. And if you want to be an effective leader, you need to develop those skills, because then everything else becomes a lot easier because they will listen to you. Right?
Absolutely. And one of the principles I believe that's we haven't discussed yet, which is probably perfect timing now, is as that leader, to get things done, you want it to be a safe, psychologically nice environment for the employees where they love working there. I've worked in companies and I've met people, they love their company so much that they literally take less pay than they would at another company that wants them, because they love it so much, because the workplace is so nice and they work really well. So that executive's got to set that sphere. And perhaps you may have some comments or some more of that principle to talk about on how to accomplish that.
Well, it does segue nicely. Thank you for that. And it is principle 6 around build the team. And psychological safety is very key to build a team. The one piece of semantics I might challenge your question with, if you don't mind, is being nice. Because I don't think you necessarily build an effective team with the word nice. Now, this is me being an Englishman. I had to study the etymology, the origin of words. And when I was at junior school, I had a teacher with the same surname as me, Bryant, and he clearly did not think I lived up to the name, and he picked on me mercilessly. And he would hit us over the back of the knuckles with a steel ruler. I'm that old that kind of punishment was allowed. And he had a pet peeve for the word nice. He said nice is a terrible adjective. It's inexact. And in fact, if you look at the etymology, it comes from the French and originally the Latin. And nice actually means inexact. It means it doesn't mean what we think it is, right? So when we're nice, we're not being very specific, right? We're being a bit vague. We're avoiding actually having the crucial conversation. And one of the plays in this book, there's two plays that are relevant to this: feedback and a crucial conversation. You see, if you're not performing and I'm nice and I make it all safe for you, but then a year goes by and you get your performance review and your performance review comes back and says you didn't meet your targets, you didn't meet your criteria, and you go, well, why didn't you tell me? Well, I was being nice. People would much prefer that you call them up, with a positive intention and said, hey, this behavior isn't going to get you where you want to be. Do you have some options and choices? Yeah, I do. Well, why don't you try this? You're going to get more of a result from that. And if that's great, fine. And if it doesn't, you say, hey, we had a conversation last month about you changing your behavior. I notice you haven't. I need to call you on this and hold you accountable, because it's not going to end well if you continue on this path. Now, you're going to actually love somebody who does that for you if you make the change. You'll hate them if you don't make the change. And that's actually what a team is about. Having worked on sports teams as the physiotherapist, and then working on executive teams and then executive leadership teams, people love a boss who sees the best in you and holds you to that standard. If I say, hey, Tony, I know that you can do better than this. Tony, this isn't your best work. I know that you can do better. That builds the team rather than being nice. Will you forgive me for picking you up on the word?
I love it. And you said it so nicely.
Well, see,
hey, I'm Italian. I can say that.
So I'm British by birth, and the British invented this sort of courteous way of speaking, so they can tell you to go to hell and have you thank them for giving them directions, right? So there's that.
I like
which brings us to the last principle, and I'll just segue myself onto that one, which is diversity matters. You're an Italian American. I'm a British who moved to Australia and then spent 18 years in Asia and ended up marrying a Brazilian and now live in Portugal, right? Diversity of experience, diversity of gender, diversity matters. We want to build teams and build companies with different perspectives. And whether that's gender, it's age, it's nationality, you want different ideas on your team, because it builds a much stronger team when you do that. Right? If you've got any dog breeders listening, a pedigree is beautiful, but if you inbreed and inbreed and inbreed, you get weak hips. A mongrel is the sturdier dog. And so make sure that you as a leader are encouraging diversity of opinion. Nobody has a monopoly on a good idea. It was a CEO of a company taught me that, because he was always encouraging different ideas, and that was in an innovation space, and it works. So make sure you're checking your own biases at the door, that somebody else might have a better idea than you, and that's what diversity really means.
I love it. And I'm really thinking with this, and I'm going to listen to this again. These are really good points, and I hope everyone really zones into this. These are great points for the workplace. I see the application of it for all my tenure in the corporate world, as well as in the, what do we call this? It is still the corporate world, but we're at home. So the home work world.
Yeah, we are, we're struggling around our linguistics as well. I mean, you and I are speaking virtually here. And so people are talking about, well, a live event and a virtual event. Well, hang on a moment. There's still live people at the virtual event. And so we have to update that, in person or remote. And so it clearly is a hybrid workspace. And I talk about the last chapter of the book is the future of work, and looking at co-working spaces and how companies can come together with facilitated events rather than just the classic 9-to-5 micromanagement, which is we've been doing since the early 1900s. And when we came off the farms and went into factories, we really haven't updated and considered the workspace for how to get the best out of humans. And there's still plenty more work to do on that. And with the acceleration of digital transformation, that can be an assistance to do that. I see the future of work really us partnering with technology rather than being replaced by it, right? The history shows that humans are never replaced by technology. If we partner with it, it can leverage us to do more of what we want to do and be more purposeful and be more effective.
Well said. And you have some plays in your book just separate from the principles, and I'd love to kind of go over some of the plays and see how that fits with the principle and how that would work in our work day world, whether it's with people in person, live people, or live people across the world virtually.
I love the way you pick up on this. It's always great to be interviewed by somebody who listens. And so forgive me, I'm going to ramble them. Look, there are 12 plays, and we don't have time to go through all of them, obviously, by the book. But the one that I want to share with you, I've already mentioned, and I'll dive a little bit deeper into it, because if you take one thing away from this interview, this podcast, it's the ability to give effective feedback. In over nearly 25 years of doing this for organizations, it is the one thing that I've seen is done badly. And the moment it gets fixed, the increase in performance is exponential. So how do we give effective feedback? Well, firstly, why doesn't feedback work as well in humans? Because humans do not consider all feedback is equal. It depends who it comes from and whether it's positive or negative. Now, if I'm sitting in a room and there's a thermostat for the air conditioner, right? If it's too hot in the room, I give feedback to the compressor, which increases the cooling. If it's too cold, I give negative feedback, which decreases the compressor's power, and the room heats back up again, right? The air conditioner does not get upset whether you give it negative or positive feedback. It's all feedback. But humans tend to personalize feedback that is not reinforcing their behavior, right? So all feedback is not equal. And we know that people that get feedback based on their strengths are 30 times more likely to be engaged. So when giving feedback, we need to think of an acronym, and I use FIF, which stands for Fact, Impact, Future. We need to deliver the feedback as a fact about the behavior and separate it from the human being, right? So I might say, hey, Tony, you're blinking a lot while I'm talking to you right now and scratching your ear, right? Now, there's no positive or negative. That was an observation. You just did it, right? And now you're going to worry about scratching your ear and blinking, right? So it's a bringing awareness to what is happening in real time. This means managers, leaders have to be really good at observational skills. And I just demonstrated that on a video call. So I didn't physically have to be in the room. And you're nodding, which means you agree with me, right? In this case. So a behavior has an impact, right? And if we ask the person we're giving the feedback what they think the impact is, rather than telling them, hey, you did this, and therefore that means you're not paying attention to me, well, that would be the wrong premise for a start. We'd say, hey, I noticed you're scratching your ear and blinking. What do you think the impact is on me? Well, in this case, the impact is I think you're listening to me. I'm feeling listened to. I'm feeling acknowledged. So this is actually good feedback. So in future, what do I want you to do? Well, I want you to keep doing it. I want you to continue.
Because the future is...
Well, whatever, so I'm trying to make this a practical example for the observer, for people. I remember my aim is to make this a very hands-on book, not a 35,000 feet abstract concept book. Can you, as a leader, observe behaviors? We might say, hey, Simon, we just came out of the meeting. I noticed in the meeting, you didn't say a word. Simon, I know that you have ideas and insights on this topic we talked about. Simon, if you don't contribute to the meeting, what do you think is the impact? And Simon says, I don't know. I said, come on, think about it, Simon. If you don't speak up, what's going to happen to the project if they don't get the benefit of your insight? Well, it's going to be delayed because they're not going to be thinking about this. Great. What else is the impact on your credibility, your executive presence in this organization if you don't speak up? Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, think about it. What do you think the impact is? I'm invisible. Yes, if you're invisible, when we come around to promotion and I'm saying, hey, we should promote Simon, everybody goes, yeah, but he doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything. What's the impact of that? You're not going to get the promotion. So Simon, we're going to go into the similar meeting next week. So that's in the future. What are you going to do differently? I'm going to contribute my ideas. Great. I'm going to hold you accountable to that, Simon. We'll see you next week.
That is a great example of self-leadership by an executive who creates a nice, safe environment. And everything that we talked about in this interview, wonderful, loved it. And once again, we talked about the new Leadership Playbook with Andrew Bryant, and you can find him again at selfleadership.com. Andrew, some great points. It really impacts and resonates with me, having been in so many different positions in the corporate world as well as the entrepreneur world. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you, Tony.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with me while I featured an elite entrepreneur who took his vision to reality. I love this about self-leadership. We discussed the new Leadership Playbook with Andrew Bryant. We talked about many factors which are listed in the book. You should check that out. Some things like how a leader deals with employees when there's a time constraint, how not to be nice, but to be a leader, to be effective, and how to deal with this new world, whatever the language is, people working at the company, people working physically, people working around the world. To me, it's very, very different. And what are the challenges and how do you be an effective leader in all of that? We talked about self-leadership. What is it? How to use that to put people together. We talked about multiple principles of the book and some of the plays, how to get that gap closed so that people respect you, how to have that executive presence. And I really like that point about silence. That is really, really good. Instead of force, speak more softly. And it's that pause, it's that silence. I really like that. I'm going to check that out again. And we talked about how to deliver to bring about a psychologically safe workplace and a whole lot more. So let me ask you this question. What did we discuss that resonated with you? Tell us your story. And please remember supporting the show with a nice review on Apple Podcasts, as well as comments on the video platforms. All right, don't make it a nice review. Make it an effective review. I'm going to change my nomenclature now. And of course, share this with a few friends to help them too. They'll thank you nicely. All right, use this and let's help you move on your journey to success. Thanks, and remember, just take action. Success awaits those who persevere and remain steadfast despite the odds. Sow good seeds, do good deeds, and join me on the next episode of The Tony DUrso Show.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's edition of The Tony DUrso Show with his key influencers. Be sure to tune in again next Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Influencers channel.